So it's a little bit of a different panel. Said, you are, you've got a company, you've created a device, basically, DinoSense. It's a patented device. And you do some pretty interesting things with your product and services, and it's different than the other three people up here. I'd like to have you spend a minute, if you would, to talk about why you did this.
Sure. I mean, thank you for asking that question. In fact, we are obviously we're focused on health assessment and health management side of things. I know this panel, this event is mostly related to insurance itself, right? Of different kind, right? Not non-health typically. So we're focused on that. I mean, I had my own personal experience. I've come from a family of doctors and physicians. So growing up, it was be a doctor, be a physician, right? And then I ended up going into engineering, right? But then ended up having my own personal experience with the health, and I thought that there was a better way to do health management, health assessment, right? In a way that would change the paradigm, right? And so that's how the company came about, and we, obviously we've been trying to solve that problem, and it's a tough problem. And there's some actually impacts of what we're trying to accomplish relative to other side of the insurance business, which I hope, we'll talk about it today as well.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's talk. I'm going to talk about your business. The two of you on the opposite ends about Limelife. I mean, you formed it to help better data integrity and sales efficiency for carriers. So, I mean, what is it about this? Why did you do that? And let's talk about what's happened, and we could talk about both your experiences prior to, and then Tom will get you. I've got a couple questions for you as well.
Hindsight's 20/20 is what they say, so probably because I'm a glutton for punishment, I think, is kind of the answer to that. No, in all sincerity, so I've been actually in Silicon Valley for almost 20 years, and during that entire time, I have sold employee benefits in the group space, and very passionate about the industry and very frustrated with the level of just how difficult it is to operate. If you think about trying to get a quote from a carrier, help a customer who's a business owner understand their options, and ultimately spent days and hours at a time, whether with our staff or as a broker selling insurance products, picking up the phone when somebody is at the doctor and that employee doesn't understand what they have, their coverage wasn't in place, they didn't get their ID card, their child is sick and they thought they had a $1,000 deductible and they have a $10,000 deductible. And just getting access to the information and being able to navigate through it, our industry is operating as though it's 1982. I mean, it's still, even in California today, again, we're supposed to be the most advanced state probably on the planet, supposedly, but 90% plus of all the small group enrollments go through paper. So Kaiser is 99%. So whether it's faxed or emailed or mailed literally in, that is how, if you buy insurance from an employer in California that is under 100 employees, almost 95 or between 90 and 99% all go through paper.
Are there any regulations about this at all? Is this just all the way it is?
Michael, that might be
It's
good.
just the way it is.
It's the way it is, right? So was that why you decided to join and co-found this company? I mean, you were very successful in working with the exchange and bringing 47% enrollment. So how does this? I mean, that's incredible to think about those numbers, what it really must mean. I mean, if I'm an employer in the state of California, that's horrible. Right?
It is, and it just magnifies both the opportunity and the current state where we're dealing with. And right now, and I'm looking at you also as consumers, many of you are probably, because we're in the middle of the fourth quarter, think about your own open enrollment experience. That is, if you're in that moment right now as a consumer. Most of you are still getting the brick. And if you're not getting the brick, maybe your spouse or partner is doing it for you, whatever, but someone's getting the brick of paper. The brochures, maybe a provider network, a couple of applications, maybe a spreadsheet or two. If you're lucky, you're getting an online experience that might be in V2, where it's better than it was last year, but there was no, it was pretty rough still. But yeah, I mean, that is the experience that we're going through. And if you're with a larger employer, you've had a maybe more delightful or better experience for a couple of years, but to Jason's point, the small group market is still very much paper-based.
So now I think I'm starting to understand why you've decided to get into this business, right? I mean, Tom, you've been doing this for a long time and trying to simplify the process and making things more efficient. Okay, all right, we'll share. Go ahead.
So, I mean, just to kind of play on these guys' experience and in the small group market, I'll just share a story. You know, I have a son that lives in Virginia, and I'm trying to help him get insurance on the exchange. And I know a lot about this. You know, I've been in the industry for 35 years. I'm 6 hours in to this discussion now, and I've been waiting for paper. And I had to go down to UPS yesterday and fax something to them, and I finally got them to admit this morning that, or they finally acknowledged to me that they have everything, and now it's another 10 days to get accepted.
I must
That's
admit,
normal. I mean,
Yeah.
that's very common if you even had a little audience talk. I mean, it's you know.
wait,
One
okay,
thing if I-
hold on. Increasing customer engagement.
Right.
Good luck.
Well, one of the statistics I've even looking at recently, we've talked about is if we look at the employee benefit space, it's estimated about 30 manual processes account for 40% of the cost of all insurers' business. So think about that for a second. And if we could deal with each of those processes, and so take just this, like, can I get to a customer service rep and not have to wait 10 days to get an answer? Like a manual breakdown there. On the group side, uploading a census. We talk to carriers that have service centers around the country that are filled with about 500 to 1,000 customer service reps that do nothing but intake and ingest censuses to get it to the underwriters. So that process alone is a business. So it's estimated if you could take and automate those 30 processes that are all manual, and each one of those could be attacked if you think about claims administration, enrollment, census upload, that you could reduce cost by 25 to 40%. So there's massive implications in terms of just, so often we talk about, AI and blockchain, all these things, and I'm trying to figure out how do we actually just get a census to be uploaded simply into a carrier and have that sync across payroll, enrollment, and my CRM, which can't be done today. So that's kind of where we're starting from my perspective. And your experience is common.
So this is like at the end of the food chain, it sounds like to me, right? I mean, you have the personal lines carriers, you're seeing a lot of advancements there, you see the distribution side, but then this is incredible to me. I mean, to be candid with you, I've been lucky enough in my experience of work that I had to deal with these kinds of things, but this has got to be incredibly frustrating for the customer, and you're trying to, how do you get the customer's trust when you face all this stuff? I mean, good luck. And then what about the Amazons and the others of the world? Are they potential entrants into this space? Is this possible?
Well, I think for certain they're going to try, but I think you had a really good point, and that is they're going to face. They don't quite understand how much regulation is involved in this industry, and how difficult it is to break through some of those regulations that are going to be obstacles, right, in many ways. But I have no doubt that they're going to try to, through other ways, or maybe acquisition and things like that, to really get into this business, because this is an area that I think is the last big business where you could, for companies like that, where they're looking for, how do I get to $100 billion more dollars? How do I get to another $200 billion? And that's going to have to be this kind of industry.
I'll add just a quick comment to that. Having worked for Express Scripts, the largest PBM in the country, and their home delivery pharmacy, at least at the time, in St. Louis is very automated and looks and operates a lot like the Amazon warehouse with all of the automation and efficiencies. And think about it with consumers. Amazon's delivering inside your front door. Whereas insurance, we have still a little bit of standoffishness with benefits and insurance companies. Whereas Amazon, we're letting them in our house.
Do you think Amazon
Close the door behind
I'll
you.
give you the look.
Do you think
Right.
they bought
Genki,
Whole
right?
Foods just for foods, or do you think they bought it for distribution centers? But so I'm not sure how to ask this question. This might not make sense, but so how does this all tie in with what this gentleman's, what the product he's providing and service that he's potentially providing? And if you, as a client or a company, wants to get access to that, I mean, what's that paperwork process has got to be a nightmare, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, certainly for us, since we're focusing on post-hospital discharge, we're still trying to manage how do you get somebody out of the hospital and keep him healthy, right? And not have him come back, right? So obviously I'm trying to solve a slightly different problem, right? But it all ties in if you're trying to, we have discussion with different insurance companies about how our services can allow them to better be in tune with what their population is doing, right? Because they obviously they have tons and tons of data when they go into the clinic, when they see the physician, when they see the doctors, right? There's a tons of data around that. And obviously, if they're processing claims, they have a lot of data about that, who gets paid for what and what services, right? But they lose connection once that individual isn't necessarily using the service, but they can't predict how they will be using that service, right? So that's the thing, that's where we would be able to fill some of that information gap, because now we have a better understanding of the behavioral aspects as well as what the health aspects of the individual, and how well are they becoming empowered, how well are they making behavioral changes that are necessary to improve cost, right? At the end of the day, for insurance, it's all about, how do I reduce that cost? And so at the same time, provide a better understanding, not only a better service, but an understanding of how my population of consumers are doing.
My quick comment to that would be, if we can drive the transactional business out of selling insurance and all of the stuff that's involved, brokers can migrate less from sellers of insurance to advisors and consultants around health, wellness, and so on, and focus more on his products.
Yeah, I mean, some people are, I'm just sorry to cut in, but some people are even starting to think that an insurance broker could become what a financial manager does, right?
Wellness,
What do they do?
wealth advisors.
Wealth advisors. Some people call them, wealth advisors, right? And that's where the brokers could possibly move into, because now at that point, now they're going to say, I'm going to have a different conversation with you, not just, on an annual basis, sell you a new insurance product, but I want to talk about you, right? Understanding you, your family, how your family is doing, right? I kind of sense that, you might be not doing so well, right? Or there's certain things that I can help you out with, and that becomes a higher level types of service that they can provide.
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting concept and would be very, very changing
Right.
to the industry. But the one thing I would have you think about with healthcare, I think it's a little bit different than maybe some of the other insurance industries, in that in most of the other industries, we're selling a financial promise. And in health insurance, you're still selling that financial promise. You're giving me money today, I'm going to pay for a risk or a liability in the future. But more than that, within healthcare today, we're challenged with the fact that we're also dealing with the dysfunctional healthcare system itself, and one that is built around transactions and individual procedures. Okay, if you look at the fundamental way healthcare is paid for today, it's paid for on a procedure by procedure by procedure basis. So what do we get? Procedures. Okay, we don't get a lot of coordination across. And
There's no incentive, right?
Right, and one of the fundamental things that has to happen, and really hasn't happened with the ACA, they've started it by allowing what they call ACOs, or accountable care organizations, which is allowing provider groups and hospitals and different people along the stream to be able to share risks together, which was in many ways not allowed prior to the ACA because of Medicare fraud rules. But what needs to start to shift here is the ability to manage across that continuum, and to actually start to manage for health and not manage for sick. And that's really, in the end, what you're trying to do in the type of system, is that coordination across. And that's it's a big challenge. It's going to require a lot of visibility across the system. And data exchange that really doesn't exist today. Today it's done by many, many people with spreadsheets and manual data, and that's the fundamental problem that is, in my opinion, is one of the fundamental problems plaguing kind of the ability for healthcare to leap forward.
Any questions at all, by chance? Come on, guys, you're going to have to have one question out of this group. All right. Well, just think of one, all right? So going back Oh, you were going to
just
say
gonna comment
something? I
briefly
was just
on
going to
just-
ask you a question anyway. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, please,
Okay, so I was
come
going to say,
back.
just to add what you were saying, I think not only is it that issue, but we go back to maybe Amazon or others getting into insurance. I mean, again, employee benefits, and Michael, correct me if I'm wrong in this stat, but I mean, in the U.S., less than 5 to 7%, I think, of us get our insurance as an individual. So the market that's talked about the most might be about 10%. But the market that's talked about the most in the news is the individual market. Then you've got Medicare. It's a whole other market in the way it does. And the rest of us get it through an employer. So you've got a number of large employers that are offering it, and then 96% of all the businesses in the country are less than 50 employees. So you're talking about now a market where you've got all, like the consumer is getting their benefits or their insurance through an employer. It's not a B2C. It's really, you're talking B2B. And so there's a lot of challenges there as well in terms of how do we not only innovate, but how does someone like that, unless who's paying for healthcare or the whole system changes, how do you actually solve that when really you're talking about B2B transaction? And there's all kinds of problems and challenges with getting to the actual end user or the customer when you have to go through an employer.
So tell me about the response that you've had from the insurance companies and the companies that you've been dealing with since you started this.
So our form of disruption, we're making slow and incremental progress. We think we're making a dent in it, but you take a lot of startups that are trying to innovate, and if you take any other industry like banking, where somebody can build on a set of standards and create PayPal or Stripe, or you take another industry where that happens. In this industry as a startup, you literally have to connect to every single carrier, and it's a different connection in each transaction. So part of whether you take a Zenefits or somebody else, part of, I mean, I don't know everything they're doing there, but I would assume part of why they finally realized that we aren't going to be in the brokerage business is they had to connect to every single carrier and had a plethora of business coming through, and that is very difficult to scale. So we're making small incremental progress.
Yeah, I'll just chime in real quick. Tom and I used to work together at Blue Shield once upon a time, so we chatted a little bit before around what it takes to move an entire industry in a direction. And it's an area that we're uncomfortable with, but I think the reality is there are some things that require legislation. Someone in a regulatory level has to say you will all play by these rules. Until then, everyone has their own disparate policies and ways of going about things. And it does stand as the reason we don't have price transparency in healthcare. It's the reason why you cannot, and you can ballpark, but you cannot find out easily, I should say, what a knee replacement will cost, and shouldn't be surprised to find out that there's probably a 10x swing in the same zip code. I'm not talking city to city, I mean in the same zip code you can find a 10x variable between this facility and that, and it has no correlation to quality. So my point to all of this is as we're trying to crack this nut and deliver better experience and consumerism and more informed and transparency and all of that, it doesn't exist until or unless, I think, in that regard, legislation happens. I think something has to happen that says you will do this. And we've already seen attempts at this in pharmacy and in some other areas nipping at the edges, but that's what stands between us and having real consumerism and transparency.
Well, I would agree. I mean, we talked about this earlier, and it can come in the form of regulation. It also can come in the form of who's paying the check. The federal government right now pays, between the ACA, Medicare, and Medicaid, pays north of 50%. If they start to move into the commercial market, employer group market, and change that, then game over. That they're gonna, the rules are gonna change in a big way. But there's no single point of a push right now beyond the government that really has any big clout, in my opinion.
I was just echo what both said from the standpoint. I was in Connecticut yesterday on another panel, and their governor was there and the insurance commissioner, and they actually were forward thinking about trying to figure out how they could get some standards. LIMRA has been working on that. Accord, which has done some standards at least on the property casualty side. I think people have been working on it. There's been a lot of discussions this year, but I agree with what Michael has said in terms of there's got to be some kind of systematic change, which will allow then a ton of really innovative companies that are doing some very cool stuff to actually focus on what's really important, which is the user experience, customer engagement, and the things that matter. Whereas right now, you have to spend a ton of time just dealing with all these different standards. And I do think that that conversation is taking place more, but we really need folks that are interested in that to actually have those conversations to figure out how to drive it forward. And again, I think it ultimately comes back to we get very frustrated about healthcare and about employee benefits, and but that's really a big part of the problem that has to be addressed when we talk about costs and so on.
Are we going to be sitting here in 5 years having the same conversation?
Probably.
I think so too.
It's kind of sad, right?
I think the problem is also that we're not really one country as it comes to health insurance. We're really 50 different countries, so it's very, very difficult to.
Absolutely. So let's kind of move along. Millennials and Gen X, differently, how are they engaging differently or engaging similarly in the group side, or is it just what are your thoughts?
I've already shared mine. Perennial.
Well, here's my point of view, and I have three millennials as three sons on the East Coast, and I actually called them to ask them this question to try to understand, and my take after listening to them and just kind of looking at or thinking about the question is, I'm not sure that they're significantly different. I think the environment is different. Health insurance is a heck of a lot more complicated today than it was 15 years ago. The amount of cost sharing at the member level is significant. The complexity of the networks is significantly different, and I think they're confused, but I think they're not the only ones that are confused. I think the whole, perennial. I love that. I love the label there, because I think everybody in the audience struggles in some way trying to figure out. I think the big difference with the millennials is that they're more they're less willing to kind of wait and to voice their frustration. And I think that as they start to access healthcare more and more, I think they're going to be a loud voice.
So what is that going to change, though? I mean,
What is that going to change?
right? Because you think about in banks, ATMs, you get access to cash, you get access to whatever you want. Now in personal lines, you can buy an auto insurance policy. Everybody wants to get access to information. They can, but how is that going to change in this environment?
Well,
with the regulatory side the way it is.
Well, less about regulatory, but I'm actually sort of surprised, and it may have been LIMRA whose research showed a surprising behavior that millennials actually had a preference to get information online but have available person to person as it related specifically to employee benefits and health insurance. I was surprised by that. I don't know that I totally buy it. Intuition and some of your own experiences might say otherwise, but I think it might test or challenge some of the assumptions around this monolithic, homogeneous experience. They want this.
Is it
I don't think it's true.
is it possible that health insurance is a little bit more complicated than they might have thought?
I think that's part of it, yeah. And companies like NerdWallet and others are really attuned to being really good communicators, specifically in that space in healthcare, insurance, and finance, that do a really good job communicating to that audience.
Well, I think selling to them is a lot different, right? Because they don't watch TVs anymore. They don't read newspapers. So you have to address that change in how they consume information, right? And how you have to approach them. And I think.
Go ahead. Finish up.
One wrong move on can be amplified a million times within their social, right? Versus you could do 1,000 things right, and that doesn't even get viewed 20 times, right? So.
Question?
Yeah, I was wondering, after Michael's keynote speech about the fact that the mandate is going to probably go away and that the premium is going to go up 10-30%, what are your thoughts about single-payer systems in the United States? I know it's a controversial topic, but want to know whether you think we're moving towards it, and what are the policies or changes that is going to move, not just toward that, or if that's just something, a pipe dream, sort of.
In 9 minutes, we're going to do that? A serious answer. So the tax bill is suggesting to take out the individual mandate, but it hasn't been voted on or passed, at least while I've been sitting up here. So it's an attempt, and there's been many attempts, so let's table that one. To the single payer, yes, we will move toward it. Doesn't mean we'll get there. But more broadly, universal coverage, I think, is inevitably the goal. And be curious if anyone is from Germany or Switzerland or familiar with their systems. Those are probably systems that are universal coverage, that maintain a private healthcare system. I spoke, there was a 2-day assembly hearing here at the state capitol where they were listening to a number of different voices on the topic of universal coverage. And my point of participating in that was to say, yes, we spend nearly 18% of GDP on healthcare and get less for it. Yes, there's better ways and more efficient models. Everyone does it better than us. But also there are other ways to do it that are closer to where we already are. And I point to Switzerland and Germany as two fine examples of that still use a blend of private and public. That's where I think we'll get to, but not quickly.
I have a slightly different take on that. But,
Finally, some controversy.
What I would say is that I think I think the term single payer system means different things to different people. I think we're going to get at some point to Medicare for all. Is what that's what I think our single payer system will ultimately be, and I think it's going to take some time to get there. I think it's going to depend on what the Republicans are effectively going to be able to do. They've spent a lot of energy over the last year here taking away the things that have stabilized the Obamacare programs. They had their problems, but they were solvable, in my opinion. And many of the things that they've done have taken away the stabilizing factors, which I think is going to accelerate the problem. And then depending on where they try to take the solution, and right now what they're trying to do is go backwards to where we were, pre. And I think as people experience that again, they don't understand. My opinion is I don't think most people know what they're talking about when they're listening. But I think when they experience it, especially given what they've had, I think there's going to be a backlash. And I think that backlash is what, if the Democrats are in place, and that's a big if. But if the Democrats are in place and there's enough of a backlash, then I think they'll move forward to Medicare for all. And what Medicare for all does, in my mind, is it basically takes away all the contracting that's going on right now. Because if you look at health insurance companies, we spend a lot of energy contracting and create a lot of complexity through that contracting. And if we can all move to everybody's paying the same rate with Medicare, and now what you're doing is you're talking about risk transfer from the government to an intermediary like an insurance company, or directly to a smaller risk unit, which is in a provider group like an ACO, like Canopy was mentioned earlier. And then what they're doing is they're competing on quality, and they're competing on service. And I think, my personal view is that's where I think we'll end up. I don't know whether it's 5 years away or 10 years away, but that's if I had to make a bet, that's where I think we're going to be.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's interesting because, as you know, Medicare has two different ways providing care. One is Medicare Advantage, and the other one is supplements with a drug plan. So it sounds like what you just said is definitely, someone advocating, if I could use that word, a Medicare Advantage, which, a beneficiary would be, subscriber would be limited to a network. That, would both systems survive? The supplement and drug plan and Medicare Advantage, because I certainly like to see choices for the consumers. And, you know, with respect to Michael, you said we'll get there, but not soon enough. And what's
Well, to
his name?
universal
Tim.
coverage.
Okay, Tom says 5 to 10 years. Do you think less than 5, more than 10?
I think, who knows? It really depends, I think, on how much noise is created in the system in the short run here. I think that, to me, that's going to be the driver. Now, you know, in addition to this, I mean, one of the things that has to happen if we try to go to what I'm envisioning is we have to address the employer market, you know, and that, you know, that's going to affect a whole new, you know, tax discussion, and because somebody's going to ultimately have to pay for this. So it's complicated, and it's, you know, it takes a lot. And right now, the government is not, in my opinion, you know, I'm sure many of you share it. You know, they're not a well-functioning and cooperative group. So, and you know, what I'm speaking to really needs to create some kind of collaboration.
I'll say one quick thing just to add, tying back to what we were talking about, millennials. I think the millennial voice carries a lot less stigma or baggage around what is or isn't you know, a social mission, a goal, an outcome. What are we trying to do? Are we trying to have insurance if you want it at a lower rate than we pay today, but some people aren't covered? Or some process by which everyone gets covered and you're selecting a single tier, or there's different types of ways to achieve that. And I think that's the discussion we're not having. We're still fighting against get government out of my insurance, and meanwhile we have a VA system that is the most socialized healthcare system that's most closely to my friend Kim's here in Canada. It is a single payer system. So we're already in some parts of our fragmented insurance system already socialized. We just don't like saying the word.
Yeah, but I think we're also going to live longer and longer because the technology is getting so much better, right? So, and
Well, with your technology.
well, yeah, certainly, yeah. But, you know, overall, the question is now, if people are going to live much longer, right, and mortality rate is going to change, right, how would that impact insurance? How is that going to insurance health? How is that going to, right? And even the cost, when you're talking about the cost, who's that going to, how is that going to be? You know, nobody knows the answer to those things, right?
Well, most of the conversation we've had up to this point is who's going to pay for it,
Right.
and not what the underlying cost is. You know, another example of just kind of what's going on in the healthcare system, you know, I talked earlier about my son, you know, and I got him a quote for 2017. Well, that same company, that same product for January 18 is 33% higher. So it's $100 a month higher, $1,200 a year higher. So it's, I mean, it's just, that's outrageous. And I understand intellectually why it happened and what's going on, and you know, the different subsidies that are going on and going away and all that. But in the end, it's not sustainable. And I'll give you a couple of statistics about healthcare that would, you know, where, you know, we have to get as a country and really have some conversation is really around is around the cost. And if you look at healthcare across the board, we spend 25% of our healthcare dollar every year on the last 6 months of life. Okay, that's a big number. And when it's your mom and your dad or your brother and your sister, it's very important to you. But when you step back and you think about it, across the whole system, is that sustainable?
My kids have already said no to me.
Right. Well, we pay more for health care in the last 6 months of life than we do on primary care education in the United States each year. So
Yeah,
it's, you know, there's some really hard questions that we have to ask and we have to get at, and that's why I say I don't know how long it's going to take, because there's a lot of facets to this, and it gets very, very political.
Yeah.
I'd like to make one more comment here. The fact that we've gotten into this kind of discussion really points out that technology is not going to solve this. That health industry is a lot more complicated than, say, P&C. And so whatever I believe or you believe or whatever, I can see right now, just from listening to this, that it doesn't matter how easy that application is to do online or how fast you're taking care of the customer, if we don't resolve the regulation, it isn't going to make much change for us as agents or for our children and our families who are using the insurance.
But I would still encourage you to work on the simplify of the system from an administrative perspective because we need it.
All right.
But just, again, and I think we as agents get extremely frustrated because we want to deliver the service, and we want to help our clients, but technology can't help us on this right now. It's about that regulation.
Great. That's a very valid point. Thank you very much. Thanks, guys. It was terrific.
Thank you, Deb.